call the meeting to order. Would everyone please sign in for roll call? Thank you. All the members of the Planning Advisory Committee are present. We have Citizen Member Chantal Gagnon, Citizen Member Kate Fryer, Citizen Member Logan Morris. We have Councillor Peter Allen, Councillor Kevin Davison. I'm Councillor Martha Armstrong, Councillor June Granger, and Councillor Dick Killam. That makes up all of the Planning Advisory Committee. We have an agenda before us for this particular meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Can I have a mover of the approval of the agenda? Councillor Allen, Councillor Killam, thank you. All those in favor, please register your vote now. And while we wait for that to come in, this is an opportunity with an approved agenda for anyone on the committee to make any disclosures of conflict of interest on this item. Nothing? Thank you. I'm going to apologize now because I have a cold, so if you hear any barking like a seal, that would be me. Hopefully it won't get in the way of the proceedings today. We have a presentation from our staff member Laura Mosier on options for incentive zoning, inclusionary zoning, and density bonusing. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Mosier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Councillor Armstrong indicated, we are here for a public participation meeting pertaining to development incentives that are seeking to incentivize the development of affordable housing. That was a lot of the same words over again. So let's jump right in. So as you may be aware, the project comes out of a motion out of council from January 2022, directing staff to explore options to incentivize the development of affordable housing. And so we did retain a consultant to perform the bulk of this project. Namely, the consultant did perform some research, which involved a review of our planning documents, interviewing key informants, and doing a comparative policy analysis on the basis of other jurisdictions. So that's under number 1 in yellow. Number 2, sector feedback in blue. We did host an engagement session with developers in the community as well as community groups in the community that provide or assist in providing affordable housing to folks that need it. Number 3 was the development of a discussion paper that did a jurisdictional review across the country for municipalities that have done similar projects, and to review key concepts associated with the project that we had the consultants undertake. Finally, through discussions with our staff, the consultant prepared the staff report and the proposed amendments to our municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. We are kicking off the approval process at this time with our public participation meeting. Following this meeting, at its next meeting next month, in December, Planning Advisory Committee is expected to make a recommendation to Council one way or another, and after which it would go to Council for first reading, a public hearing, and then second reading. As a reminder to Planning Advisory Committee, since this project does involve municipal planning strategy amendments, it does ultimately go to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Actually, it may only go to the Provincial Director of Planning for approval. However, if it is identified that statements of provincial interest are triggered, as we do expect in this case, given that this does pertain to housing and there is a statement of provincial interest associated with housing, it will ultimately be the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing who will approve these amendments. So our first key concept is affordable housing. What is affordable housing? And for such a simple question, there is not a simple answer. It really depends on who you ask, and there are two different approaches. There is a demand side approach and a supply side approach. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation takes on a sort of a well, maybe supply and demand is not the best way of categorizing it, but they come at it from the point of view of the tenant. So in order for a unit to be considered affordable, according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, it must cost less than 30% of a household's before tax income, and that includes all utilities as well. Affordable housing is required to be suitable, adequate, and affordable. So suitable means that the housing meets the needs of the residents. So if you are a family of 4, a one-bedroom apartment is not suitable for you. There is simply not enough space for a family of 4 in a one-bedroom apartment, so it needs to have enough bedrooms for the size and composition of the household. It needs to be adequate, meaning it doesn't need any major repairs and that the building complies with minimum occupancy standards. And it needs to be affordable, so it needs to be 30% or less of a household's before tax income. Another way of determining whether or not housing is affordable, this is the approach used by the City of Toronto, for example, is they come at it from the market perspective. So it takes housing that's deemed to be affordable, often is either at or below market rents. So that would be the average rent of the entire rental housing market. That includes all unit types, all lengths of tenure. So if an individual has been renting a unit for 20, 25, 30 years, chances are they're not paying the same rent as someone who is renting a similar unit tomorrow. They're generally paying significantly less in rent. So some jurisdictions classify affordable housing as either at or below the current market average. 80% is a figure that's often used. So if the average market rent in the entire rental market in a jurisdiction is $1,000 a month, a rental unit being rented at $800 would be considered affordable. It would meet that classification. Thought it would be interesting to look up our average rent. This is according to the 2021 census. So this is taking into account those individuals have been renting the same unit for 20 or 25 years. It takes into account all of this. Our average rent is $620 per month. So if we were to use the definition based on market rent, our affordable housing, most people are not renting apartments for 80% of $620. So there are good and bad, disadvantages and advantages to both approaches, but this is where some of the difficulty comes in building and maintaining and providing affordable housing. So if we look at our housing continuum, this just classifies different forms of housing. So the housing continuum includes everything from homelessness, so sleeping in a tent in a park, all the way to owning your own home as a form of market housing. So generally the need for non-market housing has traditionally been filled by government. The government provides emergency shelters. The government tends to provide transitional housing. So transitional housing is housing if you are living in a shelter. Transitional housing is somewhere you may go until a housing unit is available for you. That could be a unit in community housing or affordable housing, or oftentimes it may be supportive housing. Supportive housing includes not only a rental unit, but it may include supports such as mental health services, addiction services, occupational health services, things that will assist people to live independently on a day-to-day basis. Affordable housing is often split between the private sector and government. So deeply affordable housing or rent geared to income housing, that's rent geared to income housing is that form of housing that meets that CMHC definition of 30% or less of a household's income. However, it does occur from time to time where a private developer will construct housing that does meet that threshold of affordable, typically not the rent geared to income affordable, but oftentimes the 80% of market rent affordable. And then we have our market housing. So this spectrum does not contemplate tenure, so it does not contemplate ownership versus rental, and it does not contemplate market affordable versus government affordable housing. So where there are lots of different forms of housing, there are lots of different incentives that governments or others can implement to incentivize the development of affordable housing. One is to ease regulatory requirements to increase housing supply using market forces. So this is one thing we have undertaken at the Municipality of the County of Kings by reducing regulatory requirements associated with grouped dwellings, accessory dwellings, so those initiatives were intended to increase the overall supply of housing in the market. And this approach is often criticized. However, there are jurisdictions out there that have implemented this, namely Minneapolis in Minnesota, and in New Zealand, they have reduced virtually all regulatory requirements for the development of housing, and they have seen significant increases in housing starts and significant decreases in the rents charged for those units. So this is the approach the federal government is currently using with their Housing Accelerator Fund. They are seeking to reduce the regulatory requirements and increasing as-of-right densities throughout municipalities in the country in an effort to increase housing supply. The second incentive can be simply funding. So the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has funding programs that provide developers with low interest or forgivable loans or even cash incentives to build affordable housing, provided the unit remains affordable for a set period of time. Governments can build affordable housing. We have seen the province of Nova Scotia recently make commitments to construct a small number of affordable housing units across the province. And larger municipalities across the country construct affordable housing as well. And then there are other incentives that enable affordable housing in developments that may already be occurring, and these are the ones we're looking at today. And these are namely bonus zoning and inclusionary zoning. So bonus zoning is where a developer gets a bonus if they commit to developing affordable housing or some other community benefit. This is a fairly flexible approach, and it can be used for multiple different initiatives. Primarily, especially of late, it has been used for the development of affordable housing. So it's a bit of a quid pro quo. The developer provides affordable housing, and in exchange, the municipality may enable them to build higher, larger, or more units. Inclusionary zoning is simply the municipality establishing a requirement for affordable housing in a given development. And this again can be fairly flexible. It can be triggered at a certain number of units, at a certain height, a certain density, but ultimately it states a proportion of the units you are building will be required to be affordable for a period of time. So when we look back at our housing continuum, what type of housing is ultimately going to be incentivized by these approaches? And it's not the deeply affordable housing, it's the housing that's sitting right there between the upper end of affordable housing and the lower end of market housing within our continuum. These are not tools that we should expect to generate rent geared to income housing. And we'll go over that in a moment as well, but there are lots of different factors that make it virtually impossible for private developers to build deeply affordable or rent geared to income housing. So if we go to our bonus zoning, the MGA enables municipalities to contemplate this in section 191, which defines incentive or bonus zoning, stating that it means requirements that permit the relaxation of certain requirements if an applicant exceeds other requirements or undertakes other action in the public interest as specified in the requirements. So that's a lot of requirements. But it does also indicate that a municipal planning strategy, if it provides for it, a land use bylaw can provide for this type of zoning. So an example of a height bonus policy would establish a new requirement, the provision of a public benefit, so a public bonus, that permits the relaxation of certain requirements, maximum building height. So we can relax the maximum building height. Currently, our maximum building height in the R4 zone is 45 feet. If a developer came to us and said, I really want to build affordable housing, but I can't do it in 45 feet. I need 60 or 70 feet. And we might say, okay, all the additional units that you get above 45 feet, half of them need to be affordable. That might be the give and take. They get 2 or 3 additional stories, and the municipality gets a proportion of affordable housing. So some of the benefits that can come out of bonusing could be affordable housing, but also it's not unheard of in other jurisdictions for developers to pay into a benefit fund that then pays for public arts, or if they decided to build a high performance environmental building, either LEED or Next Zero, maybe they would get some additional stories, or if there was enhanced accessibility, they might get some additional units. And then the cash in lieu option might be used for public parks, streetscapes, social housing, parking, or active transportation. So with inclusionary zoning, Section 57 of the MGA states, notwithstanding subsection 2, a municipality may provide direct financial assistance to a business for the purpose of increasing the availability of affordable housing in the municipality. And we also see an enabling section in 220 that says, where a municipal planning strategy so provides, a land use bylaw may require and regulate the provision of affordable housing within developments, including requiring that a specified percentage of affordable housing units be provided within a development. So Section 57 enables a municipality essentially to pay a developer to build affordable housing, and Section 220 enables the municipality to require that construction. These sections are not necessarily inextricably linked in the MGA, and we won't be pursuing at this time the powers enabled in Section 57, but we are looking to take advantage of Section 220. So Hemson, which is a demographics firm out of the city of Toronto, did a report on inclusionary zoning that analyzed the market conditions that need to be in place in order for inclusionary zoning to be fully realized and for municipalities to benefit from it. Because as we have seen and as we can see in our market today, often additional restrictions or different requirements disincentivize the development of housing. So it is possible, and we did hear from our development community, that if such a requirement were implemented, that it would disincentivize them building more housing. It was labeled as additional red tape, another hoop to jump through, when the developers just want to build housing. And we want them to build housing. So, so there are 4 factors that Hemson identified. The first is a consistent supply of new housing and growth. So the market needs to have an active construction industry that is providing housing, typically at a faster rate than what is in demand. That is when a municipality can place additional demands on developers, and the rewards they would see from developing are not so reduced by an additional requirement that they decide not to build. So this states, if a lack of housing supply is affecting housing affordability, inclusionary zoning risks constraining new construction and exacerbating affordability challenges. So it can work against what we're trying to achieve as well. Patterns of intensification. Permitting intensification can lead to an increase in land values. So where we have implemented accessory dwellings and grouped dwellings in all of our residential zones, but if we look at our R2 zones specifically and we look at grouped dwellings, up until last month when these amendments came into full force and effect, an individual who has an R2 lot with 1 unit on it, and that R2 lot is 2.5 acres in size, the value just increased, because the development potential of that land has increased significantly since we adopted those amendments. So the value of that land is greater, and that raises the threshold for profitability as well, because the land value factors in as an expense as part of the development. So where our region is predominantly single-family detached housing with limited unit development and growth centers, that was before. Policies do support higher density, but abutting property owners may not be as supportive of more intense development at this time. So making the development of higher density housing have to go through a planning process opens up opportunities for neighborhood dissent and can slow down housing as well. So while intensifying development permissions increases the land value, we've reduced the process involved in developing higher density development. So land value and market strength. Land values and revenues per unit are reduced through the introduction of inclusionary zoning. If a housing market is especially weak, this can lead to a decrease in developer investment and the overall production of new housing. On the other hand, a trend of rising land values helps buoy development investment. And our developers indicated that land values are still generally low and that there was limited demand for density and building height. So they indicated that if we were to implement inclusionary zoning, even if it meant increased building heights and increased units, they likely would not take advantage of it just because the land values are low. There's no need to add an additional expense that's going to affect profitability. So housing need in the middle income group. Inclusionary zoning is best suited to address the needs of households earning moderate incomes relative to their community, but who are still unable to afford market level housing prices. So that's where that box in our housing spectrum comes. Folks who may have, under normal circumstances, been able to afford market housing due to market conditions are no longer able to, and so this type of development would benefit them. So this is just a quick Venn diagram on the conditions that need to be in place for development to occur. So there's 4 main considerations. The first is public policy. So can you build it? Will we let you build it? If that's a yes, then the developer needs to be able to find land that is of a price where they can still turn a profit once it's developed. Capital, so that pertains to our interest rate dilemma at the moment. Capital is in short supply. It's coming at a very high cost for developers. So carrying costs for a piece of land while it goes through a public process, such as one that we might engage in here, can add significant costs and can significantly affect profitability and therefore buildability. And so that's another reason why we've made it easier to build gentle density in a much more, in an as of right way, as opposed to having to go through a public process that adds additional time, which means additional interest payments. And finally, after all of that, the developer needs to be clear that there is a market. So that developer is looking at that average rent per month at $620 per unit, is looking at our interest rates, which are very high right now, our land prices, which have increased, and without some kind of incentive, we can all sort of see that affordable housing is not going to be the result of that development when land prices are high and the capital is not readily available while our market has not caught up with higher prices. Our market still needs those low rents from before. So we prepared a bit of a case study. The city of Richmond in BC developed a low-end market rental program. So developments that had more than 60 units were required to provide and build affordable units. The number or ratio varied by area. Developments containing fewer than 60 units were required to contribute cash in lieu so that the municipality could build affordable units. Any properties that were single family that were rezoned to enable additional density needed to either pay cash in lieu or include a secondary suite within the redevelopment. And this program has resulted in greater than 1,000 new affordable housing units. But this is where the market comes in. So Richmond, BC, as I'm sure we're all aware, is a very different market than here. It's a much larger market. We have very few developments that occur that We have very few developments that result in greater than 60 units on a single property. Of course, those numbers could be adjusted, but again, with a different market, we would have to do further study to figure out what that number should be and whether it should happen at all. So, we're at the point in the presentation where I'm going to go over our proposed amendments, but why did we choose this approach? So we looked at a number of policy options, including revising our as-of-right permissions, establishing new programs, including bonus zoning or inclusionary zoning, and taking a more direct municipal role in housing. Overall, the approach we're recommending is incremental in nature. We're looking at first to increase our as-of-right permissions to hopefully drive an increase in the supply of housing over the short and long term. But we also recognize that our market is not ready for this type of intervention, the inclusionary zoning and bonus zoning interventions, but it may be soon enough. And so we're looking to set up the ability in policy to make amendments or to draft new bylaws that would enable bonus zoning and inclusionary zoning in the future if the market conditions are right. So we'll go through the MPS amendments first. So the first amendment is to policy 3.1.2b, which outlines the zone purpose or the placement policies for the residential mixed density zone. And it reads that lands located in this zone are intended to provide a transition between areas of low and high density, or on properties that would benefit from flexible development options, including a diversity of building forms. This zone is intended to include residential units in a variety of building types at a density consistent with the residential 1 unit R1 and the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zones. So the amendment here is that we've removed a reference to a maximum of 8 units per dwelling. The R3 zone did used to have, or currently has, a maximum limit of 8 units per dwelling for a multi-unit dwelling. Staff are looking to increase that to 12 through these amendments. The first step is to remove the reference to the 8 units in the municipal planning strategy. Similarly, in our R4 zone, currently the unit maximum is 16 units per dwelling. We are looking to remove the limit to enable developers to take advantage of all of the lot area. So you might recall that our density is linked to a certain amount of lot area per unit. So within the R1, R2, and R3 zones, you require 2,000 square feet of lot area for each residential unit up to the maximum permitted in the zone. And in the R4 zone, we require 1,800 square feet of lot area per unit. And up and through these amendments, we would be looking to enable developers to build as many units within a single structure as could be accommodated on the property. Currently, they can do that. It just needs to be in increments of 16 units, which can cause for inflexible development, and it can lead to some pretty restrictive building designs. We are proposing to delete policy 3.1.9, which pertains to new mini home parks. This amendment has been flagged for housekeeping because at a certain point in our review of our documents, we determined and council agreed that mini home parks are a form of grouped dwellings, and there's no need to have a separate definition or a separate permitted use that it essentially enables the same thing. So new mini home parks would be considered grouped dwellings, and so we've deleted 3.1.9 because it creates a contradiction between our documents. 3.1.10 we have amended to clarify what a high density development is, and we removed a criteria that stated that high density developments could not be accessed through a low density development, which can significantly inhibit a flexible development form. Through a development agreement, staff can negotiate with developers an appropriate transition between higher density built forms and lower density built forms, and that would be our intent as staff, to ensure that as criteria B says that the design, scale, and location of buildings is sensitive to surrounding land uses, but gives developers and staff different tools through which to achieve that, as opposed to simply limiting access through a low-density neighborhood, which may not be ideal in all cases. These sections that we're going to look at are new and pertain to the potential development of density bonusing and inclusionary zoning. So the first one pertains to a community benefit incentive, so that's another term for density bonusing. So this states that council will periodically review the availability and affordability of housing, and that council would support the maintenance and expansion of affordable housing through a number of different initiatives, including working with community and private sector stakeholders, working with other levels of government, continuing to identify and address barriers to housing affordability, supporting the new development of cooperative housing developments, and using surplus municipal land, and encouraging the renewal, repair, and upgrade of existing affordable non-market residential units. So those would be public housing units. We would be looking to add another section that would enable the bonus zoning through establishing a bylaw outlining the conditions and criteria for the purpose of collecting community amenity contributions. So those would be cash in lieu for other benefits that may not be affordable housing. The bylaw could still specify that the public benefit may be affordable housing, but it also provides a cash in lieu option. And this would only be for higher density developments that either exceed the height or density permitted in the land use bylaw. The inclusionary zoning policy that we'd be looking to add is the council shall establish a bylaw to enable the municipality to outline conditions and criteria for requiring the provision of affordable housing or the collection of cash in lieu in new residential developments. So the details of how many units, what proportion, what ratio would be contained within the bylaw. But since we're not looking to enable that right now, we are just simply setting it up in policy because, as you recall, the MGA says where a municipal planning strategy specifies. So we're taking that first condition. The land use bylaw or a separate bylaw may come later. So we're also looking to amend certain sections of the land use bylaw. The first pertains to the R3 amendments, and this just takes that 8-unit maximum again out of the zone purpose. This is the statement at the very beginning of the zone within the land use bylaw that specifies what the purpose of the zone is. Within our permitted uses chart in the R3 zone, we're looking to increase the maximum from 8 to 12. So you'll see in multi-unit dwellings here, it says a maximum of 12 residential units per dwelling, and for townhouses as well, maximum of 12 residential units per dwelling. In the R4 zone, we did not need to amend the zone purpose, but we did need to remove the 16 unit. It used to say up to 16 units per dwelling in these cells, but since we're looking to remove that limit, we've removed the text entirely. The C3 or mixed commercial residential zone also permits multi-unit residential development, so we did not feel like they should be excluded from these amendments, but we've removed the maximum of 16, but we've also changed the zone requirements a little bit, where a building that would be permitted in R3 is subject to R3 standards, and buildings that are permitted in R4 are subject to R4 standards. So up to 12 units would be required to meet the R3 standards for setbacks, lot area, etc. And if a developer was contemplating greater than 12 units, then it would be required to meet the R4 requirements. We also identified a couple of little housekeeping amendments for our recently adopted accessory dwelling amendments. The first is that, so this section 14.3.3 currently reads, no more than one dwelling shall be permitted on a lot except in the residential 1 and 2 unit zone, the residential mixed density zone, etc., etc. But we do want to enable accessory dwellings within the R1 zone, so we are adding it to this section. Similarly, we were only looking to enable, since we did permit grouped dwellings in R2 and they are already permitted in R3 and R4, we are only looking to enable one accessory dwelling per lot. And so section 14.3.5A has been amended to limit the number of accessory dwellings to 1 per lot, because all other zones can access additional dwellings as grouped dwellings. So summary of our proposed amendments include increasing the maximum units from 8 to 12 in R3, removing the 16 unit per dwelling maximum in R4 and C3, removing references to mini home park development in the MPS, adding affordable housing policies, and enabling development of a bonus zoning bylaw and an inclusionary zoning bylaw. And that completes my presentation. I'll pass it back to the chair for comments and questions from the public.
Thank you, Ms. Mosier. Sorry. At this point, this is an opportunity for questions and comments from the public. I see Councillor Granger, you have your light on. This is for the public. This has already been presented to us once and will come before us again at our next Planning Advisory Committee meeting. So we'll have an opportunity to ask our questions then. So just keep it in mind, okay? So I'll open up the podium for anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward and ask any questions or make any comments. And please feel free to come down. We just need your name and address before you ask your question. Light's red. No questions? No comments? As I said, this is strictly a public participation meeting. It will be coming back before Planning Advisory Committee next month, and whatever, assuming a positive recommendation, it will then go to council for first reading, another public hearing, and then second reading before council will actually make these or put them forward. So we have no questions from the public. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Ms. Mosier is available at any time if you want to send her questions privately. So if there's nothing else, I'll draw this meeting to a close. And we will move to adjourn. Oh, can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Ms. Friars, Councillor Allen, thank you. All those in favor, please register your votes. I thank you all for joining us today. We're going to move very shortly into our Planning Advisory Committee meeting. So if you'd like to stay, please feel free, but if you have other places to go, we certainly understand. Ready? So I'll call the meeting of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting for Tuesday, November the 14th to order. Could you please register your vote for roll call, please? We have an agenda before us. Are there any amendments to the agenda to come forward from the members? Nothing? So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Ms. Gagnon? Councillor Granger, thank you. Can you please register your votes now? With the approval of the agenda, this is an opportunity for members of the committee to disclose any conflict of interest issues that they may have with any item on that agenda. Nothing? Thank you. We also have a set of minutes in front of us from October the 10th. If there are any errors or omissions, you can bring them forward now. If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Mr. Morris, Councillor Allen, thank you. And you can register your vote for approval now. And is there any business arising from those minutes from the 10th? No, I'm moving right along here. So we have a couple of Area Advisory Committee motions. You could see those on the screen, thank you. Planning Advisory Committee recommends the council appoint Sean Morrison as a citizen member on the Centreville Area Advisory Committee for a 2-year term. Councillor Granger, Councillor Killam, thank you. All those in favor, please register your vote, or otherwise. And that's unanimous. We have one more for the Kingston Area Advisory Committee. The Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council appoint the following responsible organization members for a 1-year term and the following citizen members for 2-year terms for the Kingston Area Advisory Committee. Kingston Area Advisory Committee responsible organization members, Councillor Wayne Fowler, Councillor Lauren Avery, Councillor Neil Larder, and citizen members Paul Parsons and Sarah Naismith. Have a mover, please. Mr. Morris, Councillor Davidson, thank you. If there's no debate, you can register your vote now. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So now we get into the meat and potatoes. Our first item of business on our agenda today is an application to amend the Grand Prairie Conservation District map, and that file belongs to Ms. Katie Ullman, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a presentation to the Heritage Advisory Committee for a property located at 2176 Grand Prairie Road, PID 55231468 in Grand Prairie. So the background of the proposal, the subject property has new owners who do not want the approximately 27-year-old house to be within the conservation district, as it does oppose limits on what they can do in terms of renovation. So each time the applicants want to make any renovations to the exterior of their dwelling, they would be required to receive a certificate of appropriateness from our development officers. There are several architectural limitations imposed by being in the conservation district, and this makes sense for heritage homes, but this home is not a heritage house. So the red indicates the property that we're discussing, and this is the approximate location on Grand Prairie Road. The property is within the historic hamlet of Grand Prairie, and it is about 1.81 acres in size and has approximately 200 feet of frontage along Grand Prairie Road. This is the house, which is a contemporary design, which was semi-sympathetic to the Gothic Revival style. And as you can see, these are, the second photo is renovations that the new property owners are undertaking that they did receive a certificate of appropriateness to do. These are some of the historic houses within Grand Prairie. So there are several styles that are common to Grand Prairie. And this is what the Conservation District was trying to do, is protect these styles. So the subject property has some similarities, but it doesn't match. It is quite larger than some of the historic houses in the area in terms of footprint. So for the enabling policy, in the conservation plan, 4.6, it shall be the intention of council to consider reductions of the boundary of the Heritage Conservation District by withdrawal of specific properties or portions of properties from the district upon an application by the owner of such properties for an amendment to the Grand Prairie Conservation District map. Council shall have regard to the following criteria. The stated reason for the proposed boundary amendment, the extent to which continued inclusion of the property within the Heritage Conservation District places an undue hardship on the property owner, the architectural character, landscape character, and historical association of the property in terms of its value as part of the Heritage Conservation District, The extent to which the boundary amendment will reduce the cohesiveness of the district or diminish the effectiveness of the conservation plan or bylaw, and any alternative to the boundary amendment which may be available. So for A, the stated reason is the owners would like to be removed. Having to go through the certificate of appropriateness and use traditional materials could place undue hardship upon the property owner. In terms of value, as part of the Heritage Conservation District, the home does not add any historical value to the area. And in terms of the boundary, right now, the boundary of the Heritage Conservation District is quite sporadic and spread out. It isn't a cohesive boundary. So removing this one property from it will not diminish the effectiveness of the plan or bylaw. So these would be the proposed amendments. So the first one is the map 6, which is in the Conservation District plan. And then the second one shows with the property removed. And then this would be the Grand Prairie District bylaw map, and it's the same with the second one would be the updated one with the property removed. So right now we're at the Planning Advisory Committee. Properties within 500 feet were notified for this. There was no public information meeting required for this. And for the public hearing, should this make it to public hearing, it will be advertised in the local newspaper, and property owners within 500 feet will be notified again. And this is what staff is recommending.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for Ms. Ullman? Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, so 27 years ago, was it a vacant lot, or was there a house there that they were opting into the conservation with?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Granger. As far as I'm aware, when the property owners purchased the home, there wasn't a house on the property. So this was a completely new build.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How many years would the home have to be before it was classified historic? Do we know?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Allen. So in the diagram of the historic buildings, it looks like the latest one we have would be the Second Empire, which goes up until 1900s. So I think we're looking at anything from 1900 and prior.
Okay.
Do you want that?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we remove the district requirements, automatically it's the A5 zoning that would apply. Is that correct? For any modifications to the building or the land or development on the land.
Ms. Mosher would like that one.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon. The Heritage Conservation District and the Land Use Bylaw do two different things. So yes, the house is currently subject to the A5 zone requirements. It will continue to be subject to the A5 zone requirements. The Heritage Conservation District applies additional requirements pertaining to building material and the ultimate design of any renovations, additions. Any work on the exterior of the house would be the style and architecture and materials are dictated through the Heritage Conservation District plan. It doesn't change any of the requirements under the land use bylaw.
Okay, so it's mostly aesthetic, and that the requirements under the bylaw would dictate more height or width or the type of development.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? I have one. I believe I read in your report that when this was set up, it was an option for the homeowners in this particular area to opt in or opt out, and some made, one or the other of those decisions. So it wasn't put upon them. It was a choice that they made. And these new owners have not made that choice.
To you, Madam Chair, that is correct. It was an opt-in process. Homeowners had to sign a declaration to opt into the district.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any other questions. The potential motion before us is the Heritage Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to amend the Grand Pré Conservation District map by removing a property at 2176 Grand Pré Road, PID 55231438, Grand Pré, as described in Appendix D of the report dated November 14th, 2023. Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Allen. Mr. Morris, thank you. Is there any debate? Nothing? I'll call the question. You can register your vote now. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is an application to rezone a property at 1291 Highway 201 in Greenwood, and that is Ms. Ullman's file again. So it's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a land use bylaw map amendment or rezoning application for the property located at 1291 Highway 201, property ID 55448005, and a portion of the adjacent parcel, PID 555-17080 in Greenwood. So this is to rezone a portion of the properties from the rural mixed-use A2 zone to the rural industrial M3 zone to permit aggregate-related industrial uses, building and construction contractor uses, and self-storage facility uses. The subject property has been in the same family for generations, and a development agreement for the subject property was approved by council on June 1st in 2004, and it was registered, June 25th, 2004. The development agreement enabled the development of the property as an abattoir and meat packing plant. So the property is no longer being used for that. So Glenn Balby, on behalf of KRJ Property Holdings, applied to rezone this to be able to permit and reuse the existing buildings as office space for a local excavating and paving company, as well as the development of an asphalt plant in association with the business and trailer storage. So this is the approximate location of the property on Highway 201 in Greenwood. And this is an aerial view of the properties. The subject property is 30.21 acres in size and has 183 feet of road frontage along Highway 201. The access shall be provided from this property. And as you can see, there's an adjacent abutting property, and a little portion of this property is also included in this in this rezoning in order to allow those buildings to be used for these new purposes as well. So the abutting parcel has a lot area of 8.8 acres. And has approximately 303 feet of frontage. All access, though, for commercial or industrial uses will be through the main parcel that is being proposed to be rezoned. So there is an existing commercial access there. And the subject properties, as well as the surrounding properties, are located within the rural mixed A2 zone, within the agricultural designation. So the size of both parcels combined is about 39 acres, and the proposed area to be rezoned is about 17.37 acres. So this is just to give you kind of a bird's eye view of the parcel. So CFB Greenwood is behind it. So just for some clarification, CFB Greenwood gets its water from Greenwood, not the base itself. The property is located over 2,800 feet from the closest PMQ. The property is located over 1,000 feet from the growth center. The closest residential dwelling is over 1,700 feet away from the proposed asphalt plant. The noise and jet fuel emissions from the adjacent CFB Greenwood would be greater than what is created by the asphalt plant, and the applicants will have to go through provincial licensing and permitting, which is responsible for mitigating any environmental concerns. So this is the future land use map. As you can see, it is within the agricultural designation. And this is the zoning map. As you can see, it is within the rural mixed use zone. And then we have federal lands behind. And then over to the side, as I stated, about 2,800 feet away are residential uses. So this is the subject property. So the mapping does indicate that there are some water courses on the property. So this photo is to show that the property owners did install drainage ditches throughout the property, and this is what they look like. They're quite overgrown. There's no cattails or anything growing in them that would indicate that there's a lot of water in them. And then these are some site photos from the site visit. So the first one shows some of the buildings on site. The second one shows the proposed location of the asphalt plant. And the third photo shows the distance. So this is from behind the buildings looking towards the road. And those are the buildings kind of far off in the distance, just to kind of show you how far back this proposal would be from the main road. So a site visit was conducted in February 2022 by a previous planner that was assigned to this file. And then another site visit was done on October 3rd, 2023 by a planner and the manager of planning and development. There are 4 existing storage buildings located on the subject properties that were formerly used in the abattoir and butchering operation. The proposed asphalt plant is intended to be developed in the rear portion of 1291 Highway 201. This portion of the subject property is in an unmaintained, densely treed and vegetated area. So for policy review, the enabling municipal planning strategy policies, 5.3.3, council shall consider amendments to any of the zoning maps in the land use bylaw, provided the application is for specific development and is A, to rezone land to another zone enabled within the same designation unless the zone change is specifically prohibited within this strategy. 3.4.3, permit within the agricultural designation, and C states rural industrial M3 zone as provided for policy in policy 2.2.2. Since the rural industrial zone is listed within this policy, council is able to consider rezoning from the rural mixed use A2 zone to the rural industrial M3 zone. Policy 2.2 also provides direction to council indicating the rural industrial M3 zone is enabled within the agricultural designation. So 2.2.2, establish and enable the following rural zones common to the agriculture and resource designations in the land use bylaw. So B, rural industrial land zone to include existing industrial businesses and areas intended to contain industrial businesses that require large tracts of rural land, industries that support agricultural and resource uses, including but not limited to agricultural processing and sawmills, and industrial uses that need to be well separated from residential uses. There is a distinction between urban and rural areas within the municipality. Focusing urban development and higher density housing within growth centers best utilizes both the lands and services, creating vibrant growth centers. Industry has been historically located on the periphery of communities or out in the more rural areas, providing additional space and potentially buffering between different uses while still being in proximity to areas where the materials and resource generated will be used. Given this, council has opted not to pre-zone extensive areas as rural industrial M3, since it is difficult to predict where the demand for this type of development and business will be in the future. So 2.2.12, consider proposals to rezone lands within the agricultural designation, except lands within the agricultural A1 zone or the resource designation from any other zone to the rural industrial M3 zone. In evaluating such proposals, council shall be satisfied that the proposal A will not negatively impact nearby agricultural operations or contribute to undue conflict with rural residents. So the proposed asphalt plant will not be in close proximity to the neighboring residences and will not be visible from the road. The existing buildings are set back a minimum of 700 feet from the road, and the proposed asphalt plant is proposed to be located in the rear portion of the site, in a location that is approximately 1,600 feet from the road. This is proposed to be developed in the rear in an area that is heavily vegetated, and it provides a buffer and a minimum separation distance to the closest dwelling of 1,200 feet. This dwelling is in the ownership of the applicants. A separation distance of roughly 1,600 feet is provided between the asphalt plant and the closest dwelling in an unrelated ownership, and approximately 685 feet between the zone boundary and the dwelling. The subject property already has industrial vehicles using the access and being stored on the property, and the applicants do not believe the traffic in and out of the property will increase. The self-storage facility is proposed to be located in the northwest portion of the area to be rezoned on the property between the existing uses and the area proposed for the development of the asphalt plant. So B limits the rezoning area to a size reasonably required to accommodate the proposal, including any proposed phasing. So the subject properties are approximately 39 acres combined, and the proposed area of rezoning is 17.37 acres. This encompasses the access and areas leading to the buildings, which are located over 700 feet from the road, and the area to accommodate the proposed asphalt plant site. Due to the irregular shape of both the subject properties, as well as the area to be rezoned, the size is reasonable for the proposal, as it will provide a reasonable area to accommodate the current plans for the business and enable some degree of flexibility for growing their business. So for C, meets any additional rezoning criteria in the designation applicable to the lot for agricultural designation. And D, meets the general criteria for amendment of the land use bylaw set out in section 5.3. So the general criteria for amending land use will be reviewed in a few slides, and policy 3.4.23 provides specific rezoning criteria within the agricultural designation. So 3.4.23, consider rezoning from agricultural A2 to rural industrial M3 or rural commercial C4. In considering such amendments, council shall be satisfied that A, the application only applies to land that has not been in recent agricultural production as determined through a review of diverse information and sources. So there has been no agricultural production on the subject property since the development agreement enabling the development of an abattoir and processing plant. In addition to reviewing Schedule F, the land cover map, staff reviewed historical aerial photography from 1973 and 1987, as well as digital aerial photography from 2011 and 2015. Schedule F, the 2012 land cover map, indicates that the front portion of the subject properties were in active agricultural production at the time. As has been previously discussed, the method used to generate this map has difficulty differentiating between cleared land and land in agricultural production. The aerial photography from 1973 and 1987 indicate that these lands were in agricultural production at the times the photos were taken. Since 2004, existing and new buildings on the property have been used for an abattoir and butcher shop. Agricultural production has not occurred on the property since that time. Since the property Since the property has been used for a use that has been more industrial in nature than other uses permitted in the underlying zone, staff are of the opinion that a change to another industrial use to facilitate the reuse of buildings is appropriate at this time. Lands that were in agricultural production in the past are not proposed to be further developed with buildings or structures that would limit the reuse for agriculture in the future. Resources consulted indicate that the area proposed to be developed as an asphalt plant was not in agricultural production and was wooded up until very recently. So for the continuation of this, for B, the proposal would not rezone more land than required for the specific proposal cited in the application. The subject properties combined are approximately 39 acres, as I stated, and we're proposing to rezone 17.37 acres. This does take into consideration where the access is located and the fact that the asphalt plant is located so far back on the property. The area proposed to be rezoned is only large enough for the proposed application and some growth in between where the asphalt plant would be and where the existing buildings are. So the applicant would be able to expand their business a little bit within the parameters of this rezoning. C, will not create undue conflict with nearby agricultural uses or rural residents. Staff do not expect the proposed use to create undue conflict with nearby agricultural uses or rural residents. The negative impacts associated with asphalt plants, such as noise, dust, and odors, are also associated with agricultural activity, generally speaking. The business and construction contractors' use will be performed primarily off-site, and self-storage facilities are generally seen to have very low impacts on neighboring properties. And then D, meets the general land use bylaw amendment criteria set out in section 5.3. So the municipal planning strategy contains several general criteria for applications for a map amendment to the land use bylaw. These criteria consider the impact of the proposal on the road network, service, development pattern, environment, finances, and well fields, as well as the proposal's consistency with the municipal planning strategy. In terms of the other general development criteria contained in the municipal planning strategy, there would be no additional costs to the municipality related to the rezoning of the subject property. There are no concerns regarding storm drainage, service, road networks leading to the subject property. Traffic generation is not expected to have any negative impact at this point. And in terms of environment, that will be through the provincial government. They will do the licensing and permitting for that. And the applicants will have to follow provincial regulations for that. So in terms of site suitability, the proximity to CFB Greenwood, jets are large polluters, and the noises they create will far surpass the noises of the asphalt plant. Staff do not expect the proposed uses to create undue conflict with nearby agricultural uses or residents. The negative impacts associated, as I stated before, are similar to agricultural noises, dust, and odors. And in terms of general criteria, staff are of the opinion that it does meet the general criteria of the municipal planning strategy. So this is where we're at in terms of the amendment process. A PIM was held March 28th, 2022 at the New Beginning Center in Greenwood. 9 letters were sent out to residents within 500 feet of the subject property, and there were 5 members of the public in attendance. At the public information meeting, 1 resident had concerns about property values and noise, and 2 residents in attendance were in favor of the proposal. We did receive phone calls. We had 2 phone calls with regards to concerns of smell and distance. Smell, and then another phone call was in terms of the distance of the 500 feet notifications that were sent out. They wanted it to be a greater distance for that. So right now, we are at the Planning Advisory Committee. Should this go to public hearing, properties within 500 feet will be notified again for a public hearing, and the public hearing will be advertised in the local newspaper.
Thank you. Are there questions of clarification for the presenter? Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, was this information letters or information given to CFB Greenwood as to this application?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam, yes, that information was provided when the application was accepted in 2022.
And they didn't indicate any expansion for their land there for where it's close to it? No conflict?
Through you, Madam Chair, we received no comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. So the 39 acres, so we're just rezoning 17.37.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Granger, that is correct.
And that's for both businesses, the asphalt and the self-storage?
That is correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions, but I'll try to be to the point. Some of them have been answered in the presentation. So I just want to clarify, as it is now, there's no excavating, paving, or asphalt making or self-storage on the site or in immediate proximity to the site, correct?
Ms. Mosier?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, the building and construction contractor's use is using some of the existing buildings as office space and storage, but there's no asphalt being produced on site at this time.
Okay. One zoning, Madam Chair, one zoning is changed to M3 Rural Industrial, so if I understand this correctly, the owner is in fact free to develop any activity that is permitted as of right within the zoning without going through the PAC or public hearings, regardless of the proposed development. So if some of these components that are aimed to be don't occur and wants to do another activity once it's zoned M3, there doesn't need to be any further public.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, that is correct. However, it is important to keep in mind all of the other requirements of our land use bylaw, including setbacks, and particularly with regards to this site, a 50-foot separation distance from any water course. So between the setbacks and the water courses on the site, there are some significant constraints to development of a very significant industrial use in this location.
Okay, thank you. This is in regards to the distances between various uses, and we've been using feet in this report. But are there actual examples of what well-separated, close proximity of nearby? Do we have exact measurements of these terms as defined in the bylaws? Do we know exactly what, in terms of measurement, well-separated or close proximity, is that defined in the bylaws?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, no, because those are somewhat subjective terms and would vary depending on the use. Close proximity between an asphalt plant and another use would be different than close proximity between a one-unit dwelling and another use. And well separated, similarly, two one-unit dwellings would be considered well separated provided there were 8 feet between them. That might not be the case for an asphalt plant. So they're subjective, that's why they're not defined.
Okay, thank you. I am a little confused about the information regarding the Greenwood source water. My understanding is that a portion of the water, of the drinking water for Greenwood base and residential units also comes from within the well fields of the base and not just the source water from Greenwood Village. So do you actually have information regarding those overlays of where those well fields are?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, we do not. That information would need to be supplied by CFB Greenwood, and to our knowledge or understanding, we do not have any information related to any wells on base.
Okay. Okay, and so you did mention the map for the hydrological map, so thank you. That was one of the errors in the document. However, it does leave me with considering that the map does have water bodies. There seems to be an omission of data relating to pollution to wetlands in Appendix C, which is the MPS 537CX, I guess that's for a 10. That information is omitted. There's nothing written next to that particular section, and I wonder if that's because it's omitted on purpose because of the comments that are in the section right before C9, or is it because current consideration of impacts and water courses was not conducted in the analysis of the report?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, it's important to remember that asphalt plants are licensed and regulated through the Provincial Department of Environment. With regards to the water courses, from the municipal perspective, the proponent would be required to meet our 50-foot water course separation, and any and all monitoring would fall to the Department of Environment. They do have stringent monitoring requirements that the proponent is required to follow, and so from a municipal perspective, provided the separation distance is met and the requirements from the province are met, staff are satisfied that there would not be any negative impacts associated with pollution of water courses or wetlands.
Okay, so it's relation to the setback. Okay. And the final question, Madam Chair, is regarding to conflict use with agriculture, impacts on agriculture. If you can bring back the map, that's sort of not the big satellite map, but one, it seems to me there's an agricultural use immediately adjacent to the property, but I'm not, yeah, that's too big. The other one, that's a little close, that one. Is that, according to that eastern border there, is that active agricultural use? From satellite imageries, it seems to be active agricultural use. Is that the case?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, it is our understanding that that is an active agricultural use. However, when we think about some of the impacts that come from the uses proposed in this development, we think of noise, odor, dust, vibration, and those are the exact same impacts that tend to stem from agriculture, but also significant air traffic. So given the balance of the other impacts in the area, staff are confident that there would not be any additional negative impacts on farming practices in the area.
So there is no consideration for council in regards to impacting agricultural businesses, even on the perception that maybe what the farmer is growing could end up being contaminated, since the zoning for industrial is so close to this site compared to where the Jets land and not land, or whatever, where they do land, sorry, but where they go. Is that even the perception that the land might be contaminated, could that impact negatively the agricultural business? And that's something that council should consider as a possible cause for conflict between the uses?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, provided the proponent meets all of the monitoring and requirements of the province for the operation of an asphalt plant, staff do not anticipate any negative impacts on neighboring farm operations, and we did not hear from the neighboring farmer who was notified.
Okay, thank you.
I had too many on. Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a review, I guess, on this whole concept of developing land handy federal land or provincial land. D&D or federal land or federal jurisdiction at any time, if there becomes a conflict in the future, they can override anything we do here. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam, no, it's my understanding that the federal government would not be able to override, but perhaps Ms. Javrak has more information.
Hang on, I gotta turn some light. Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's the word override that is giving me pause. When we think of federal or provincial regulations or properties, usually it's in context of their ownership as well. And that's when they can choose through the Interpretation Act to not follow our rules. But in terms of federal law stepping over onto private property, no, with the caveat in this particular case, because of the height restrictions that exist around airports, that would be the only thing offhand that I could think that would bleed into properties adjacent that aren't owned federally. Was that sort of what you were getting at?
Sort of, yes. Just wondering if in the future the CFB Greenwood decided they wanted to expand in that area, their base for...
By definition, that would be ownership, so they would have to expropriate or
Okay.
purchase.
Yeah,
That's right.
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Killen. Are there any further questions? Okay. The recommended motion before us is the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone a portion of the properties located at 1291 Highway 201, PID 554480005, and lot 2012, oh, sorry, not,
Yeah.
2012 Highway 201, PID 5551780 Greenwood, from the rural mixed-use A2 zone to the rural industrial M3 zone as described in Appendix D of the report dated February 14, 2023. Do I have a mover? Councillor Davison? Mr. Morris, thank you. Debate. Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several points. Obviously, as you know, all me, from an environmental point of view, we're in a climate crisis. We don't really need more greenhouse gas emissions or water quality degradation. So obviously from that, it doesn't help neither the climate crisis or biodiversity crisis. The soil is very sandy on the site as well in that whole areas, and that means rapid drainage through soil. And we have not been provided here with the limits of the well fields for the hundreds of residents in 14 Wing Greenwood, which is a neighbor to the site, though it may not be in direct contact groundwater reach. My own information from being on the Greenwood Source Water Protection Committee is that there is sources of water that are at the base and on the border of the base and on the border of the fence to that area. However, we do not have that data at this time, and I find that that data should be necessary for industrial development. As a Greenwood resident, I don't necessarily agree that the traffic won't make things worse as it goes through Central Avenue and Bridge Street. So there are maintenance issues there that are in relation to traffic. As well in the housing crisis that we are in, my understanding from the village of Greenwood is that we're trying to increase residential housing as a priority. We just approve ourselves a R3 zoning in proximity to this site for multiple units of housing developments. And so if in 10 years the current growth continues, the growth center border may actually need to be extended. It might be a possibility that the council will want to look at or the village would want to look at. And its current borders are in close proximity or adjacent to Wellfields or the Annapolis County border, Kingston and the Annapolis River and CFB Greenwood. Highway 201 on the eastern border in this direction is really the most likely economical area to expand the growth center if ever that is needed. So I think there will be conflict between residential uses and an industrial site as it's in close proximity to the border. And I think, Madam Chair, if I can, I have confusion as to the Land Use Bylaw 106 and the purpose of the M3 industrial zone. The purpose, I'll read it here, is of the rural industrial M3 zone is to provide for the development of industrial uses that support agriculture, forestry, fishing, or other industries that require large tracts of land and or need to be well separated from residential uses. As Ms. Mosher explained, we don't have a definite measurement for what well separated mean, and it has to be into context. And in trying to put that into context, I used what staff has previously or has provided for another zoning change that is in this report, which is the next document 2311 on page 43, that actually uses measurements to help us decide what is in close proximity nearby. And so I'm going to resume, but for reference for the members of the committee, it's page 43 of our agenda package, subject property information, and this is for us to consider zoning. And here, the staff, with regard to zoning, and this is a residential area, and so I'm going to read, it's actually simpler. With regard to zoning, although neighboring properties in the vicinity are primarily zoned residential mixed density R3, there are a variety of zones found within close proximity of the property. 2 mixed commercial zones exist to the west, approximately 0.2 kilometers, and the east, approximately 0.5 kilometers of the subject property. There are a few properties zoned to the general commercial C1 zone that are found within close proximity. And then there's the R4, A1, M1, or M2, M3, I1, and C2 zones are also found within 1 kilometer radius of the subject property. So here I have 200, 500, 200 meters, 500 meters, and 1,000 meters, or 1 kilometer, to indicate to me that I should consider this as being close proximity to, and that what is happening there should help me direct whether or not I should change the zoning. So to put these measurements in the context of this proposal, they're roughly, from my calculations using the ArcGIS tool that is on the county's website, as well as Google Map, roughly a dozen residences within a 500-meter radius. And that's like an 8-minute walk or a 2-minute bike ride. There's the residential R3 zoning that we just approved, which is 630 meters from its center to the center of the proposed site. There's the border of the growth center, as I mentioned, that's 475 meters. And there are hundreds of residents within a kilometer of the site. So if I use the same measurement by staff, what it means to be in close proximity or nearby in the vicinity of proposed change for zoning, then I don't see how a conflict could not arise from changing to rural industrial M3, even with mitigation setbacks, because there are so many residents within a 1 kilometer radius. And I didn't even calculate the ones that are on base. So I have to use the information that is clearest to me in this sense, and even though well separated from residential uses and well defined, I find that with the information provided, there is a potential for conflict with a zoning that is industrial so close to and encompassing so many residential uses surrounding the Greenwood Growth Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just came to my mind. I was, as the member opposite was speaking, I was thinking about some other asphalt plants that I know of in the county and where they're located, and I think when I think about those, and I think this location is similar, likely when you'd be driving down this road, if you didn't know that it was going to be there, you never would know, considering how the site is configured, but also because I've seen some other asphalt plants, and they really, I know of other ones that are within close proximity to residential uses. Same thing, there would be hundreds of residences within a kilometer radius. And I just don't know that I see there being a conflict there. I do agree with staff that that a lot of farming uses would produce similar potentially offensive effects, being dirt and sound of equipment. But as I said, generally speaking, knowing how that type of operation would work, obviously as well only being during business hours, I don't consider there to be a conflict with residential uses or with the farming uses for that matter.
Thank you. Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would tend to agree with Mr. Morse. I would think that an abattoir thank you, would be a little bit worse than what is being proposed here, just because of the hours. I think this might be something a little more welcomed to the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further debate? I will say that I'm not, at this point, 100% behind this, but I feel that they need their due process. So I will be voting in favor to move it forward for first and second reading and public hearing here in these chambers. So if there's nothing further, we have an approved motion, and I will call the question. So you can register your votes now, please. And that is approved with one dissenting vote. Thank you. The next item is an application to discharge an existing development agreement and to rezone a property on Highway 1 in Waterville. And this file belongs to Miss Alice Jacob. And your mic is on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for my voice. I'm just recovering from a flu. So we have an application for a land use bylaw map amendment to rezone a property at 5431 Highway 1, Waterville. The red circle on the map shows the approximate location in Waterville, and the PID is 55159180. In June 1988, the trustees of Jehovah's Witnesses entered into a development agreement with the municipality to develop a place of worship, a church, on the subject property. And the church became non-operational in 2020 since COVID. And in August 2023, the applicant purchased the property intending to convert the church into a funeral home. And this would result in some modification to the structure's interior, including converting a washroom into a kitchenette and introducing a new wall in the existing office space to create an additional room. So the property is currently located in the residential mixed density zone, which does not permit funeral homes as of right. So in order to permit the proposed development or the proposed conversion, the DA will have to be discharged and the property will have to be rezoned to the mixed commercial residential zone. This here is the aerial view showing the property boundary. The property is within the growth center of Waterville, and it has an area of 41,551 square feet and has a lot frontage of 230 feet on Highway 1. The area is primarily developed with low-density residential uses, and there are also a few commercial uses nearby. So this here is the existing church on the property, and over here is a driveway and the associated parking lot. Vegetation on the property, they have vegetation lining on all three sides abutting the adjacent properties, and there is also a planter box towards here, and there's some grass cover to the side of the church. In terms of topography, the site is relatively flat, but it sits at a lower elevation than Highway 1. These are some of the photographs of the site. Over here, the image to the left, we have the driveway and the parking lot. And to the right, it shows the existing church. As I mentioned earlier, the property is in the residential mixed density zone, R3 zone, and the zone allows a variety of residential uses and a few non-residential uses as well. This is a future land use. The property will continue to be in the residential designation in the future as well. This image shows some of the zones found within the area. The area has a variety of zones within proximity to the subject property. So there are 2 existing C3 zones on either side. This is the subject property over here, sorry. This is the subject property over here, and we have 2 C3 zones on either side of the property, and there are a few other zones like the residential 1 and 2 unit zones, the residential multi-unit zone, agricultural A1 zone, light industrial commercial zone, M1 zone, heavy industrial M2 zone, institutional zone, which permits a different variety of uses within the area. Public information meeting was not required for this application because the application was for a lot that measures less than an acre. As notification letters were sent to property owners, 25 property owners within 500-foot radius of the subject property. No concerns or questions were received regarding the application. Policy 5.3.3 is what enables this application. So the policy reads, consider amendments to any one of the zoning maps of the land use bylaw, provided the application is for a specific development, and A is to rezone land to another zone enabled within the same designation, unless the zone change is specifically prohibited within the strategy. And this policy directs us to policy 3.1.3, which lists the various zones that are enabled within the residential designation. And if you look here, criteria D is what enables mixed commercial residential C3 zone within the residential designation. And it further directs us to policy 3.2.2, which is the zone intent or the zone placement policy. I will come back to this shortly. So further to policy 3.2.2, policy 5.3.5 provides additional policy directions in terms of the zone placement policies and impacts to be considered when considering an application to rezone land. So the policy reads, consider in relation to all applications to rezone land, A, the applicable zone placement policies, including any specific policy criteria for applying the proposed zone set out within the strategy, and B, the impact of both the specific development proposal and of other possible uses permitted in the proposed zone. Now going back to the zone placement policy. So the intent of the mixed commercial residential C3 zone is to permit both residential and lower impact commercial uses. And it is also to complement established commercial areas. So these areas shall be generally located on main transportation corridors and associated side streets that have commercial development, traditional main street areas within commercial areas that have not yet experienced much development, or areas where flexibility between residential and commercial uses is desired. Now going back to the policy 5.3.5, when we look at criteria A and B, the property is located on a main transportation corridor, Highway 1, and there are several commercial establishments lining Highway 1, but the developments become more residential towards the location of the subject property. And if we look at the zoning of the subject property, it is located within the residential mixed density zone. The R3 zone permits a wide-ranging residential developments, including multi-unit dwellings containing up to 8 units. And it also permits some non-residential uses like places of worship, community facilities like libraries, local government offices, and a few other things. So places of worship, which is permitted as of right in the R3 zones, are also facilities that generally offer funeral services. And if you look at the proposed rezoning to mixed commercial residential, the C3 zone also permits wide-ranging residential uses, including multi-unit dwellings and other group dwellings, 1-unit and 2-unit dwellings and semi-detached dwellings, similar to the R3 zone. And it also permits other low-impact commercial uses, which are preferred close to a residential area. And as I mentioned earlier, the site is located in an area that offers flexibility in the type of uses, as can be seen from the variety of zones found within the area. And the proposed funeral home, it can be developed in any of the C3 zones found on either side of the property. So when considering all this, staff are of the opinion that the proposed rezoning meets the applicable zone placement policies, and the proposal and other permitted uses within the C3 zone are appropriate and reasonable. These are some of the supporting visions, objectives, and policies from the MPS that supports this application. So these are some of the objectives and visions related to concentrating developments within growth centers and making use of the existing infrastructure. The proposed development aligns with Council's intention to direct urban development to growth centers, and the development is also consistent with Council's intention to maximize infrastructure efficiencies. And these are the objectives from the MPS related to transportation. The development is consistent with Council's intentions to encourage development densities along major transportation routes and to promote the development of compact, complete communities. And the rezoning would enable the applicant to relocate his business from its existing location in Windsor to the proposed location in Waterville. The proposal will be consistent with Council's intentions to encourage entrepreneurship and can also meet the economic development goals of the municipality. In terms of our general policies, the application was assessed against the various criteria listed in Policy 5.3.7, and it was found to be in keeping with the intent of the MPS. It is not in conflict with the municipal bylaws or regulations. There is no financial impact on the municipality because of the proposed rezoning. And in terms of land use compatibility, it is staff's opinion that the development will be compatible with the surrounding uses, given the variety of zones found within the area that permits different uses. And there is adequate sewer and water services to service the proposed development, proposed conversion. And no traffic hazards or congestion are expected from the proposal. There is adequate fire protection services to service the development. No flooding or serious drainage problems are expected from the proposed rezoning or the proposed conversion. And the site is suitable in terms of grade, soils, and geological conditions, utility right-of-ways. In terms of our process, as I mentioned earlier, a PIM was a public information meeting was not required, and an AAC was not required either. We are the Planning Advisory Committee. Properties within 500 feet were notified about this application, and they will be notified again for the public hearing. The proposed rezoning from the residential mixed density R3 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone enables the reuse of an existing building for a new use, and is consistent with the intent of the municipal planning strategy, including the general criteria for all rezonings. As a result, staff are recommending a positive recommendation, which is shown on screen. With that, I end my presentation and pass it back to the chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the presenter? Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 3 questions. Under the C3 zone, would a crematorium be possible with this zoning change or no? It's a funeral home. I just linked the 2.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the citizen member, under the C3 zones, crematorias are also a permitted use,
Are also.
but it is not part of this application.
Okay, but once the zoning changes, it could be an activity as of right in the zone.
That's right.
Okay, and does. Okay, and then likewise, once it changes to a C3 zone, does the building as it is meet all the setbacks and height requirements for this zone so that it would be in compliance with the requirements of the zone, or would it end up a non-compliant building?
Who wants it? Okay.
I don't want
Ms. Mosher?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, yes, the building does meet all the requirements of the C3 zone.
Thank you. And on a different, well, I guess you're going to find me funny on this one. Traditionally, Mi'kmaq and other people hold funerals in their homes. Could funeral homes simply have been added as a permitted activity within the existing zoning or within activities permitted within a place of worship? Would that make more sense rather than changing the whole zone, given that the immediate area is mostly residential? Or is that an even harder thing to do than changing the zone?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, it's not necessarily more difficult. However, were someone to have a funeral within their own home, we wouldn't consider that a use under the bylaw. That would be an activity that someone is having in their home. The use remains a home because aside from the one day the family held a funeral, it was otherwise used as a home. Staff are of the opinion that the rezoning to the C3 zone is more appropriate than enabling funeral homes within residential areas, because funeral homes can have a lot of traffic associated with them. Most residential properties would not have the space to accommodate a parking lot for a reasonably sized funeral. And it's also important to remember that this is Highway 1. This is our main transportation corridor, and commercial uses are appropriate along main transportation corridors, especially ones that are permitted within the C3 zone, because after all, this is a mixed commercial residential zone, and so the commercial uses enabled within this zone are seen to be appropriate even within close proximity to residential uses.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Nope. So the motion before us is that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 5431 Highway 1, PID 55159180 Waterville, from the residential mixed density R3 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone as described in Appendix D of the report dated November 14, 2023. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Killam, Ms. Gagnon, thank you. Is there any debate? No? Okay, I'll call the question. You can register your vote now, please. Thank you. I know, I do have one question. There was an application to discharge an existing development agreement. Does that only come forth to council, or do we need to make a motion here? Just to council. Okay, thank you. Our next and last item is an application to enter into a development agreement to permit a comprehensive neighborhood development in Port Williams, and that file belongs to Ms. Mosher, and your light is on.
Sorry, somewhere along the way my presentation got closed. Just had to find it again. Okay, yes. So this afternoon we are here to discuss a development agreement application for comprehensive residential development on a vacant piece of land located on the west side of Collins Road in Port Williams, having a PID of 55037-139. By way of background, this application was reviewed by the Port Williams Area Advisory Committee on October 12th, 2023, where a positive recommendation was received to this committee. Our subject property in the grand scheme of our municipality is in Port Williams, as indicated by the red circle on your screen. The property was purchased in 2018 by SAG Developments, Inc. for the development of a multi-unit co-housing project. This area is identified in the development agreement to the south as an area for future development agreement, so that day has come. It is a 28-acre property with 2 separate frontages on Collins Road, and has just under 12 acres located within the agricultural or A1 zone, and those lands do not form part of this application, and just over 16 acres of the land is located within the Residential Comprehensive Development District, or R5 zone. So this is a this is a snip of our zoning map with the subject property outlined in red. And the blue area of the property is the R5 area, and the yellow area, or I guess it looks a bit green on the screens up there, is the A1 area. Oh, and we've highlighted it for you in yellow and blue. So the proposal as received, it has gone through some minor adjustments since it was received. It does consist of 2 phases. Phase 1 consists of the 32-unit multi-unit dwelling that is the co-housing project that prompted this application. For housing nerds like myself, a co-housing development is one where the entire housing development is co-owned by its residents. It's very similar to a cooperative or co-op housing. However, this is very much a direct ownership situation where all of the owners are actively involved and live in community with each other. It's my understanding that there will be shared facilities, including kitchen and recreation opportunities for individuals, and it has been quoted to me that there would be a communal meal every evening, although that does not factor into the development agreement. In addition to the co-housing development, there are proposed 13 one-unit dwellings in a grouped dwelling format, as well as 5 traditional one-unit dwellings on public road frontage. Phase 2 included 2 33-unit multi-unit dwellings and 11 additional one-unit dwellings. This is a preliminary site plan that was submitted at the time of the application. So here we see our co-housing development. You can see this, I don't know if you can see that, but it says multi-A 21 units. So that has been, that map was revised even since they applied. The original application indicated 32 units in multi-unit A. These would be the grouped dwellings here. These are labeled as garden suites. So they would be owned through a plan of condominium. So it would not, each unit would not need public road frontage, but they could still be held within an ownership tenure versus a rental tenure. And these are the 5 one-unit dwellings along the extension of Steepleview Drive. Phase 2 includes a new road, as well as our 2 33-unit multi-unit dwellings fronting on Collins Road, and the additional 1-unit dwellings along the new road. You can see these phases outlined, phase 1 in red and phase 2 in blue. As we process this development agreement, there were some adjustments made to the proposal, namely in that we've expanded flexibility for essentially all the uses, enabling somewhat higher residential development. So all of the multi-unit dwellings were increased from 32 and 33 units to 40 units. This provides some additional flexibility for the applicants. These would need to be developed I might be getting ahead of myself, but the development agreement requires that these be developed at R4 lot requirements, so 1,800 square feet will be required for each unit. So the 33 doesn't get to 40 without there being enough lot area to support those additional units. We have enabled all of the one-unit dwellings, including those in the grouped dwelling format, to be developed as two-unit dwellings, should that be desirable for the proponents at the time. So our Phase 1 contained a total of 127 possible units, and our Phase 2 contains up to 178 possible units. These adjustments were made to better implement council's policies. This revised proposal would enable the development of an overall density of 7.8 units per acre, whereas the previous one was significantly lower. I don't recall the number though, but I could look that up if you wished. We have reviewed this. So we did also revise the phasing of Phase 1, specifically with regards to the intersection between Steepleview Drive and the new street. Initially, these two one-unit dwellings were included as Phase 2. However, staff, in discussion with the applicant, have reallocated those 2 units as Phase 1, on the chance that instead of fronting on the new road, they could also equally front on Steepleview Drive, and staff cannot justify any reason to prevent their development in advance of that new public road going in. So this is the revised Phase 1, including these 2 units, and this is the revised Phase 2. This again is our subject property in an aerial photo format. We see to the south and the southwest residential development of typically low density. However, this area to the south is subject to a development agreement, subject to an R5 development agreement, and includes a mix of uses, including an apartment permissions for up to 2 40-unit apartment buildings on this proposal. And there's significant townhouse development down here on Leaside Court. But otherwise a mix of 1 units, 2 units, as well as townhouses and apartments are permitted within that development agreement to the south. This is our zoning map. As we can see, the subject property is outlined in the R5. It didn't include the A1 simply because this is not subject to the development agreement. A public information meeting was held not in these offices, but at the Port Williams Village Commission on March 30th, 2022. A video of the staff presentation was posted on the municipal website up until fairly recently. A number of concerns were raised by neighboring residents who did attend in full force. There were concerns around the order of development, particularly with regards to construction vehicles accessing the subject property on Steepleview Drive, the height of the multi-unit dwellings, the existing condition of Collins Road, which I understand has been upgraded, and if it has not, it continues to be on the Department of Public Works 5-year capital plan. So we would expect those upgrades to occur likely next year if they haven't already occurred, but as far as I understand, they have occurred. Pedestrian safety due to the lack of sidewalks in the area. There were concerns around the density of the proposal, potential increases in traffic, and again, the safety concerns related to construction vehicles accessing the subject property through Steepleview Drive. So when we look at our policies within the residential designation, council shall establish the following residential zones in the land use bylaw, and criteria D says the comprehensive neighborhood development, or R5 zone, is enabled, and lands within this zone are intended for integrated and comprehensive planning of new large-scale neighborhoods by development agreement. And for our policies governing these development agreements, we look to MPS policy 3.1.11, which indicates that any property having a minimum size of 5 acres shall have the R5 zone applied to it, especially if it would benefit from a public planning process or if it needs to be well integrated within surrounding lands. Where this subject property is on the edge of the growth center, Subsection C is of less importance, given that it would only be integrated with those lands to the south. However, staff have turned their minds to that. Policy 3.1.13 provides the criteria council is going to use to assess this development, and indicates that council shall consider only by development agreement proposals for comprehensive plan neighborhood developments within the comprehensive neighborhood development or R5 zone. In evaluating such development agreements, council shall be satisfied that the proposal A, consists of uses that are consistent with the intent of the residential designation, and where this proposal is entirely residential in nature, staff are satisfied that it does meet the intent. It's also required to provide a mix of housing options rather than only one building type. So within this development, we see multi-unit dwellings, 1-unit dwellings, 2-unit dwellings, and grouped dwellings all enabled. So staff are satisfied that this criteria has been met as well. C has an overall minimum density of 4 units per acre for developments serviced by central sewer and water, and that a similar density for unserviced developments provided the environment can sustainably support. This proposal will be serviced by Port Williams Water and Port Williams Sewer, so we are looking for a target of 4 units per acre. However, phase 1, given the proposed density and mix of 1 and 2 unit dwellings, would have a density between 5.5 and 7.5 units per acre. The assumption being if all of the lower density type uses were developed as 1 units, this would result in a density of 5.5 units per acre. And if all of the potential 2-unit dwellings were developed as 2 units and not 1 units, it would result in 7.5 units per acre. The blended density is 5.99 units per acre. The phase 2 density is between 11 and 12.5 units per acre. And the overall density is between 8 and 9 units per acre. And actually the overall density of the proposal at its time of application, without the adjustments that staff and the developer agreed to, the proposed overall density would have been 7.8 units per acre. So this is well below our permitted density within our R1 zone, which is roughly 10.5 units per acre. Criteria D pertains to infrastructure costs, and council is meant to be satisfied that it has a neutral or positive long-term impact on municipal finances. So staff looked at the development, and we consulted with our manager of revenue and our manager of financial reporting. And our manager of revenue indicated that we expect the development at full build-out to generate between a total of $257,000 and $270,000 per year for the municipality, and $130,000 and $140,000 per year for the village. By comparison, in terms of municipal costs, the proposal includes approximately 580 meters of new road, and each meter of road costs approximately $30 per year to maintain. That would include future replacement costs as well, so $30 per meter of road per year, which would result in an average maintenance bill and potential future replacement of $17,400 per year, as compared to up to $270,000 in tax dollars. So I think it's safe to say that this would have a positive long-term impact on municipal finances. Criteria E indicates that the proposal is intended to include appropriate phasing to ensure orderly development that minimizes the creation of vacant parcels of land between the existing developed lands and the proposed site. And this is the reason for phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 results in an extension of the existing development, whereas phase 2, were it to be developed in advance of phase 1, would create a fairly significant vacant parcel between the existing end of Steepleview Drive and the future end of that public road. And staff would like to ensure that that connection to Collins Road occurs, and so phase 1 needs to be developed in advance of phase 2. Criteria F indicates that the development is intended to result in public infrastructure that is efficient to service and maintain, and given the density and our previous analysis related to road costs, staff are confident that this has also been met. Criteria G indicates that the development is meant to encourage active transportation by providing sufficient sidewalks, pathways, and/or trails consistent with the transportation infrastructure policies contained in section 2.3. Staff have not required new sidewalks in this development simply because there is no existing sidewalk network within which to connect. The previous development agreement did not include any sidewalks. There are not sidewalks on Collins Road, and so staff have not required sidewalks. However, the proponent has proposed a trails network through the site, and one of those trails is intended to connect from Collins Road to the end of Steepleview Drive, and it has been written into the development agreement that this trail must also connect to the existing trail network within Port Williams. So while there's no sidewalk network, there is an ongoing, there is an existing trail network that is undergoing expansion by the village right now, and this would also include the inclusion of the trails provided by this proponent. Criteria F indicates council shall be satisfied that the proposal minimizes environmental impact by protecting sensitive natural features and incorporating low impact approaches for managing stormwater. Staff were not made aware, nor did we observe any sensitive natural features on the subject property, and the proponent is required to submit a stormwater management plan that not only ensures good stormwater practices by ensuring that post-development flows are no greater than pre-development flows, but they also need to manage these flows using low impact approaches, such as swales, ponds, and the like, versus hard infrastructure. Criteria I requires that a minimum 100-foot wide vegetated buffer within the comprehensive neighborhood development zone adjacent to the A1 zone. So this would be along the northern edge of the development agreement and along the eastern side of Collins Road, where the two multi-unit dwellings have been provided. This area can be used as a park, recreation, and service utility purposes, but must not contain buildings or any other use. So the road is proposed, the new road as part of phase 2 is proposed to be located within this buffer. Given that, staff have not required that this buffer be vegetated. Also in consideration of that, the lands north of the A1 portion of the subject property are owned by the village and currently have 2 of their municipal wells as well as a water tower. These lands are not being used for farming. Traditionally, this vegetated buffer, the vegetation of the buffer is meant to shield the resulting residential development from sprays emanating from agricultural uses, and where there's no agriculture going on the A1 properties that are meant to be buffered from residential areas, staff have not required vegetation due to the lack of intensive agriculture going on. I should have pointed out earlier, but I will point out now that criteria J, where it pertains to open space dedication of 10% through subdivision, the previous development agreement where it identified these lands as part of a future development agreement have already met the open space dedication requirements. So the open space for these lands have already been dedicated to the village and or the municipality, and this requirement has been met, so staff have not required any additional open space contribution. However, we have required that the trail network be publicly accessible, either through ownership or easements. K gives council the opportunity to consider alternative road, lot, servicing, or other infrastructure standards, but these have not been incorporated into this development agreement. L indicates that sufficient vehicle and pedestrian transportation linkages be provided between any adjacent town, village, or property, and between the new roads that are proposed and the trail network, staff are satisfied that this criteria has been met. Council is meant to be satisfied that this development complements existing and planned development within an adjacent town or village, and this does complement the development to the south quite nicely. And then it meets the general development agreement criteria. So we'll go through those a little bit later because we still have to discuss the Port Williams secondary plan, and it has similar criteria. So when we look to our vision, goals, and objectives in support of this development, we're meant to concentrate new commercial and residential development within growth centers, and Port Williams is one of our growth centers, and encourage efficient service and infrastructure delivery and a diversity of housing. And I think we've seen through these criteria that both of those, that this proposal would contribute to achieving those vision goals as well. Within our residential objective, we're meant to accommodate a wide variety of housing options, including opportunities for mixed uses and increased densities in areas where urban services are efficient to deliver, and provide a wide range of housing choices, including affordable housing. Subject property is also subject to the Port Williams Secondary Plan, which was adopted in 2010 and seeks to fulfill the following the following vision statement: that Port Williams of the future is a thriving community where people of all ages and stages of life can flourish, and where its distinctive character and spirit are respected and valued. In order to achieve that, they include policies related to servicing, which requires that all new development within Port Williams be serviced by central sewer and water services, and we have confirmed with the village that those services are available and adequate for this proposal. There's also a residential goal indicating that Port Williams is intended to accommodate residential growth that meets the needs of residents from all ages and stages of life. And the co-housing development that was the trigger for this proposal is intended to be an alternative to a nursing home. The idea being that if people live in community as they age, that they will not suffer the same health impacts as if they did not age in community with other individuals like themselves. Another residential objective is to direct higher density developments to central locations, and where this development tops out at 7.8 unit per acre, we would not consider this high density, and so this location is appropriate for this development. Policy 4.5.24 indicates that council shall consider only by development agreement development in the comprehensive residential or R5 zone, residential developments which are sympathetic to neighboring farms and will not interfere with normal agricultural activities. In considering such development agreements, council shall be satisfied that before we move on to the criteria, staff are confident that this is sympathetic to neighboring farms, given that there are several properties in between this one and farming operations. But council shall also be satisfied that the density of the overall development is a minimum of 4 units per acre. These are all going to sound very familiar because this policy informed the development of the R5 policy in our MPS, so this predates our current MPS. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, given that there is some significant overlap. So criteria B indicates that development of the area shall be phased in such a manner to allow the largest amount of agricultural land to remain in production as long as possible. These lands are not currently in production. However, if they were to be in production, phase 2 would enable that while phase 1 was developed. A separation distance of 100 feet or 30.5 meters shall be maintained between any residential building and land actively used for cropland, and 600 feet or 183 meters shall be maintained between any residential building and land used for intensive livestock operations. There are no intensive livestock operations in proximity to this application, and the separation distance between cropped areas and any development proceeding from this application does meet the required separation distance of 100 feet. So this is an aerial photograph of the proposed development. This is showing the entire subject site. So remember, anything north of sort of here is in the A1 zone. So the closest cropped area would be here, and the closest dwelling would be around here. And this is roughly, I think, 150 feet. So this would be, so there's the R5 zone outlined. And so the closest crop area is right here. And so a separation, I think, of 150 feet is provided there. We have required an increased setback from Collins Road in order to maintain 100 feet from this cropped area as well. Criteria D indicates that any vegetative buffer shall include plant material. So again, we have not required that the buffer be vegetated simply because the farming where we've required the buffer is not occurring because the lands are in ownership of the village. E, vehicle access onto Collins Road is not permitted with the exception of public roads, private driveways that resemble public roads, and driveways needed for safety purposes. So that's where the public road off Collins comes in. The multi-unit dwellings that front on Collins Road are not permitted to have a driveway off Collins Road. They are required to have a driveway off the new road. However, we have enabled that a construction driveway be installed in the location of the new public road to provide the opportunity for construction vehicles to access the subject property without going through Steepleview Drive. However, it should be noted that the municipality does not have the ability to restrict certain types of vehicles or uses from accessing the public street and accessing properties adjacent to the public street. So we do not have a way to restrict construction vehicles to use Steepleview Drive, but we can incentivize them to use an alternate access. F, higher density areas are intended to be centrally located, while lower density areas are located towards the growth center fringe. And again, this would be considered a lower density development, and so it being on the fringe is entirely appropriate. The proposed design and maintenance are intended to adequately protect any identified well fields. So this is within a well field. However, staff are not concerned, given that the way that construction occurs nowadays tends, especially with the price of heating oil, most developers are not looking to install furnace oil boilers in new developments. Developers, most of the time, utilize heat pumps or propane. So staff are not concerned with any contamination of the well fields. H pertains to open space dedication, which has already been met by the previous development agreement, as well as I. J requires a groundwater study for proposals located within wellfield zones A and B. And again, given that developers are moving away from using furnace oil, we did not require a groundwater study. And the Port Williams Area Advisory Committee, which consists of many of the village commissioners who also sit on the water utility, did not raise any concerns as well. And criteria K, that the proposal meets the general development criteria. So we will go over those next. So we've seen these many times before. The proposal is in keeping with the intent of the MPS as we've just reviewed. We do not believe there will be any negative financial impacts on the municipality. We do not believe there's any land use compatibility issues. With regard to the proximity and adequacy of school, recreation, and community facilities, the Annapolis Valley Center of Education did respond that the schools in the area are reaching capacity. However, they were confident they would be able to accommodate any new students generated out of this development. The proponent did prepare a traffic impact assessment, and this was forwarded on to the Department of Public Works. This would be regarding traffic hazards or congestion. And the Department of Public Works did review the traffic impact study and did find it acceptable, and as such do not expect there to be any undue traffic hazards or congestion resulting from this development. We did consult with the Port Williams Fire Department on the adequacy of fire protection, and they did not indicate any concerns with the proposed development, nor did the village express any concerns pertaining to the adequacy of water and sewer services. With regard to potential for flooding or serious drainage problems, it is expected that any increase in stormwater management in stormwater flows will be managed through the use of a low impact stormwater management plan that is required to be approved and prepared to the satisfaction of the municipal engineer at the time of permitting. Again, staff do not expect any negative impacts on well fields or other groundwater supplies, nor do we expect any pollution of including soil erosion or the siltation of water sources resulting from this development. We also don't expect any negative impacts on neighboring farming operations, and we do believe that the site is suitable for development. So the summary of the development agreement, it does divide the development into two phases. Phase 1 being the extension of Steepleview Drive, and Phase 2 being the development of a new public road that connects to Collins. The development agreement regulates the location and form of development by applying the requirements of the residential 1 and 2 unit zone to the lower density building forms, so 1 unit dwellings, 2 unit dwellings, and group dwellings, and has applied the R4 zone to multi-unit dwellings. Actually, the grouped dwellings are subject to the requirements of the R3 zone because when we drafted the development agreement, the R2 zone didn't permit group dwellings at that time, but now it does. It does require a minimum density of 4 units per acre and regulates the subdivision of the land. So this is a copy of the site plan. We can see the 2 new roads that just popped up in black right here and in blue right here. Maybe not much of a distinction on the screens, but this is the location of the grouped dwellings, subject to the R3 requirements. These are our Phase 1 low-density uses, so 1 and 2 unit dwellings, and this would be the location of the Phase 1 multi-unit dwelling. Our Phase 2 contains low density in proximity to the Phase 1 low density, and our multi-units front on Collins Road. Additional requirements include a walking trail extending from Collins Road to the existing trail system in the village, and an increased setback from Collins Road, as well as restrictions on driveway access on Collins Road. And finally, the development agreement regulates the location of parking provided for Phase 2 multi-unit dwellings. We did include a couple of non-substantive amendment options, one being changes to the site plan that do not result in the creation of new roads or an increase in the number of units within a multi-unit dwelling, provided that the density is consistent with the requirements of the residential multi-unit zone, and any changes to the phasing of development would be a non-substantive amendment as well. We are here at the Planning Advisory Committee. Properties within 500 feet were notified of the public information meeting and will again be notified for the public hearing, which is also advertised twice in the local newspaper. And I have a recommendation on the screen, and I will pass it back to the chair for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of clarification? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just regarding the vegetation and the buffers. I'm to understand you're not requiring a buffer on the north border that's with the unused agricultural land. Is there any possibility that at one point that land will be used and then the developer will be stuck with not having a buffer or having to implement a buffer, or is this land really highly chance to change zoning so that it can be developed? Like, what could happen there?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, we have required a 100-foot buffer. We've just not required that it be vegetated. The lands to the north are in the same ownership as the lands to the south. It's just a split-zoned property. So whether or not those lands are farmed is entirely up to the current owners. They've not indicated any plans to farm that land. I hope I'm answering your question, but maybe I misunderstood.
Well, if they do, let's say, they do decide to develop it agriculturally, whatever they decide to do, but it becomes agricultural in use, then does that buffer require to be vegetated at that time in place to protect from the spraying that you mentioned, that kind of stuff? Or the buffer is there, but it's not vegetated, and that's fine, the owners of the property don't need to do anything?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, again, the current owners have not indicated any interest in farming. They're doctors, so it's unlikely that they're going to farm that land, and it would be up to them if they wish to put in a buffer at that time or not. But no, we've not required a vegetative buffer, primarily because that is where the Phase 2 road is intended to be located, which is consistent with the policies.
Okay, and in the same line, is there anything in development agreements or requirements? I know some municipalities have this, that when development happens and trees need to be planted because the area is not vegetated enough, and so they plant trees for the buffers or for the trails. is there an imperative for the developer to be responsible for replacing any dead trees that die within a 3-year period at their cost, or there's no necessarily requirement for that in the municipality or in the development agreement?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, there's no requirements for trees to be planted either within the development agreement or within our regulations generally. There are, as far as I'm aware and recall, there are no trees on the property. It is a former agricultural property, so it is quite clear. There may be some shrubs and scrub, but there are no significant trees on the property. So no, we would not require that trees be replanted or to be planted. That would be, again, a decision on the part of the developer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Laura. The new proposed roads in this development, would they be referred to as J-class roads, where the municipality and the province share the cost of maintenance?
Through you, Councillor Allen, no, these would be just considered subdivision roads. They would be entirely owned by the municipality, and we would be entirely responsible for maintenance.
100%.
100%.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment, I did attend that meeting with Port Williams Area Advisory Committee, and Laurie did a really good job in presenting that, and it was very well received by people that were there, in particular the Port Williams group. So I just wanted to make that comment and be glad to make that, move that motion when it comes to.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? So the recommendation before us is the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit a comprehensive neighborhood development on a vacant parcel of land located on the west side of Collins Road, PID 5503-7139, Port Williams, as described in Appendix C of the report dated October 12, 2023. I have a mover in Councillor Killam. Seconder in Ms. Friars. Is there any debate? Nothing? I'll call the question. You can register your votes now. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. We have reached the end of our business on our agenda, but is there anything that any of the committee members would like to bring forward as other business? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take this opportunity to just reiterate again that that as some public comments to the staff has come in that the 500 feet notification process is too short a distance for any commercial industrial business activities. So I again bring this up to the council to maybe look at reviewing this procedure and increase the radius of notification to ensure the population that's potentially affected by any major changes, but any changes to the area are actively engaged in the democratic process. And the other thing I wanted to say is my term ends at the end of this month, and I haven't yet completely decided if I leave or not. I am wanting to go back to full-time work. And so in any case, whether I come or not, I wanted to thank everyone for having been on this journey with me. It's been a great learning experience, and I hope the next citizen member asks as many questions as I do.
Thank you very much for that. And we certainly appreciate the time and effort that you've put into the Planning Advisory Committee, whether you choose to come back or not. Thank you. If there's no other business to come forward, this is an opportunity for the public in our audience to make any comments that they may wish to make. So if you'd like to come forward to the podium, we just need your name and your address. Please come forward.
Madam Chair,
Your name and your address?
my name is Alan Ng. I live in Greenwood. I am the Wing Environment Officer of 14 Wing Greenwood. I'm here as a public citizen and a neighbor. I have a comment responding to Councillor Killam, and also I have a few questions that I wish to ask the proponent. I am not sure if it's appropriate to do it here for the questions about their project, of course.
About the item number 2, about the asphalt plant?
Correct.
Perhaps maybe we can deal with your comments and you can see staff afterwards as far as your questions go?
Yes, I can.
Is
do
that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. You go ahead.
The comment is to respond also to Councillor
This is
Trish.
Staff. Ms. Dvorak.
So in general, federal jurisdiction does not apply to provincial jurisdiction, also municipal. However, there is, because it is an Air Force, military Air Force base, actually same for any other airports, there is a Federal Aeronautics Act and the zoning regulation under that I'm not, again, I'm an environment officer, I'm not the property officer, so how the details, I'm not 100% sure. But with that also relate to the questions I wish to ask about usually, of course there are new technologies, but usually, like Councillor Morse mentioned, there are with asphalt plant, they are usually with establishment of the aggregate elevator. So because of the proximity to the Air Force Base, usually, not usually, there is a requirement to go through the NAVCAN, Navigation Canada, to for clearance for anything that is erected in the proximity of the airbase. So, of course, I will, after the meeting, I will ask the proponent if she's available for that. But we do not, in general, we do not have any jurisdiction outside of our property. So I just want to
I appreciate that. But we would have notified 14 Wing that this was something that was going on. So they are aware. There's always an opportunity to hear from them at any time as we move through the process.
Actually, I just called back to the base, and the property officer and also their geomatics manager, they do not know about this project until now. I'm telling them. So I will ask the proponents who, if they are willing to disclose that, we would like to ask who they talked to and when did they do that.
Sure, no problem. Yep,
Okay.
You can have a conversation with Ms. Mosier and Mr. Dvorak after the meeting, and they can probably answer your questions for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming forward. Is there anyone else that would like to have anything? Oh, sorry, Councillor Granger.
Madam Chair, may I ask if, for the next person coming down, please come down. If you could just raise the microphone a little bit, I'm very hard of hearing, and you just have to move the whole table up.
Yeah, she's going to move it for you.
It's better.
There you are. Just your name and your address, please.
Anna Spooner, 195 Old Post Road in Grand Pré.
Thank you.
I have a comment about the Conservation District piece. And a question, is does the A5 zoning supersede the Conservation District bylaws?
Do you want to take that, Tricia?
Through you, Madam Chair. Supersede is not the word that we would use. You've got the land use bylaw, which is the zone, so the Hamlet Conservation Zone, the A5. That's this document, it sits over here. There's another document that also comes into play, which is the Conservation District. So they're kind of going together, where the land use bylaw is a requirement versus the Conservation District, which was an optional opt-in by property owners.
Okay. So my comment as a 22-year resident of that lovely community, and living right in the middle of it all, as was mentioned earlier, the Heritage Conservation District is very higgledy-piggledy. It's individual lots. It's not necessarily the whole piece. And within those lots where people have volunteered to be a part of this conservation district, there is this current modern building, which doesn't qualify as a heritage building, so doesn't qualify under any of the Heritage Properties Acts, as far as I understand. There are, I believe, 5 other properties that are part of the owners, original owners, when signed on to this. Those properties in the future, being 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you may run into the same issue. I'm wondering if, because we have the Provincial National Historic District, the Provincial Historic Properties Act, is it absolutely necessary to have this conservation district? Because we have, for this very tiny A5, one-of-a-kind zoning, very strict rules about subdividing, about land use, etc. And this conservation district piece is, well, the map is really out of date. A lot has changed in the community within the properties that are part of that district. So the consideration, if it sticks around, the conservation district, moving forward, this map has to be updated. Because any of your conversations, if someone's referring to it, it's inaccurate. Their buildings have burned down. Modern buildings have been built on lots that were originally empty, but those owners of those lots signed on to this, and those buildings are not on this map. So, yeah, given this tiny piece of about 1 square kilometer being a very desirable place to live, and it being a very difficult place for anybody to buy a property in, yeah, I wonder if, again, this map needs to be updated, and I question whether do we really need a conservation district when there is the Provincial Heritage Properties Act, of which some of these Heritage Conservation District lots do have an actual heritage building on it. I believe there are but there are also properties within that didn't sign on, and they have heritage buildings. So there's a real mishmash, and yeah, just like to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, I think probably a conversation between you and Ms. Ullman, whose file this was, would be constructive, and maybe a little bit of history as to how it came about. And
Oh, I'm aware of the history. I've lived in the community since 2001, and I was...
Were you started this?
No, I didn't start it, but I'm well aware of the neighbors, and
Okay.
I was part of I was for a little while on the landscape
Grand Prix.
sorry, it's back too far. Peter, help me. The JPACA. Yeah, I was on that.
Wow,
And it was a
JPACA?
nightmare.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was a nightmare.
Okay.
at that time.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm very familiar with it. I've read all the documents. I'm happy to have the conversation.
Sure.
But specifically regarding the request of this particular individual property owner, I think they should be allowed to go ahead and do their thing. And I'll talk with Ms. Oldman.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, sure, come on down.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair.
That's okay.
It's problem with getting old. I forgot one point about the information from Ms. Oman that the potable water from the base, and in addition to Ms. Gagnon's comment, is we do have 2 production well in the proximity of the proposed site of the asphalt plant. So I did a quick Google thing, a rough estimate. Again, is not accurate, I mean. So the nearest potable well from D&D is 500-600 meters west of the proposed site. That is on the south side of Six Brook. And then there's another newer production well that is north side of the Six Brook, roughly about 600-800 meters away from the proposed site. Just want to let the committee know about that.
Okay,
Again, my apology.
that's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Okay, I don't see anybody else. We only have one member of the public who hasn't spoken. Okay. The date of our next meeting is December the 12th, 2023, in these chambers, 1 o'clock. And if that is all, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Granger and Ms. Gagnon, thank you very much, and you can all register your votes now, please. And surprise, surprise, that is unanimous. Thank you all very much.